Soraka is the definition of a League of Legends support and enchanter. With obnoxious poke and powerful healing throughout the game, she is so fun to play. But do you know how to play Soraka properly? In this guide, I will teach you everything you need to know and more to carry consistently on our beloved Star Child. Let's get into it. Let's kick things off with Soraka's identity. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that she is a lane bully. You don't just AFK, sit back and scale. This is a very common misconception. And if you take anything away from this video, it's that she can absolutely dominate lane, and I'm going to show you many examples of this. You want to be a psycho, you really want to use your ranged advantage, you really want to use your powerful, overloaded Q to your advantage, because her Q is one of the most stacked spells in the game, given that it does damage, it slows, it heals you, it gives you move speed. But not only is she a lane bully, even outside of lane, she doesn't want to sit back, AFK and play team fights front to back. She is a combat medic. She's very fast. Her build and her passive allows her to be really fast, and you want to run around in the middle of all of the action and try to heal up your teammates as much as possible. And the reason that I say combat medic is because she needs to be in combat, right? You can't just sit back and be as useful as other enchanters. You need to get into the thick of things and try to land your Q to get the best heals possible. I want to talk about Soraka's power graph for the moment. So she has a U-shaped power graph. She is very strong in the early game, and then she can have a little bit of a dip in the mid game, and then when she really stacks up all of her support and enchanter items in the late game, she is an absolute menace. But the dip isn't that noticeable, so it's more of a lowercase u than an uppercase u. And of course, she is the healer of League of Legends. She is the evergreen healer, and she's just so fun in being able to prevent kills from the enemies. She has scary extended fights, especially level 1, and this is mostly to do with her Q, how short of a cooldown it is, how strong of an ability it is, and you're going to see plenty examples of this as the video goes on. I just want to leave you with the picture of Soraka absolutely dominating lane and then leaving lane and running around and getting into the midst of actions and healing up in the moment. Moving on to Soraka's matchups. So she is very blindable, and every matchup is going to be playable to an extent. She is going to have some matchups that are a little bit tougher than others. So she can allow for scaling enchanters to have quite a lot of freedom to scale against her. If you think about enchanters like Nami or like Seraphine or like Sona, they are going to be able to outscale Soraka because Soraka is a bit more of a jack of all trades than these other scaling enchanters. The worst archetype for Soraka to verse is long range, as her Q is a lot of her strength and is mid-range herself. So against shorter range matchups, her Q can be landed quite easily and can outpoke or out-sustain a lot of other matchups. In mid-range matchups, she's totally fine in using her Q. Long-range matchups, that's when she really starts to struggle because she can't handle just pressing her W to heal allies without landing her Q first. So basically any long-range poke is going to be really tough for her to deal with on paper champions such as Vel'Koz or Xerath, maybe even Karma. And this could be out of lane as well. If there are a lot of ranged champions on the enemy team, then it's going to be a little bit trickier for you to land consistent Qs. Now let's move to the other end of the spectrum, against hard engage, against really high threat. So she can struggle to stay alive against these higher threat lanes, but she can also choose to be reactive and keep her teammates alive and extend the trade, as you're going to see over here. So her herself, she's not going to be very tanky, of course, as she is a squishy immobile enchanter, but if you let your ADC be the one to be engaged on, you land your Q, you get your heals out, you extend the trade, then it can be quite manageable, and then of course you're going to outscale these higher threat matchups. Against engagers with middling range like Alistar, Rel, Leona, she can land consistent Qs and it's not going to be as tricky as some of the engagers with much higher range and a lot of threat at the same time. Champions like Pyke, like Blitzcrank, and like Nautilus. So when you are versus long range, you want to really play on the edge. You want to try to dodge their skill shots confidently, maybe even in a forwards position so that you can get in range to land your Q. You just can't sit back and be a sitting duck and just try to heal your ADC without finding these Qs. So this is a really tough matchup, and you're going to have to be really aggressive and try to outplay the skill shot game. The good news is that once you are outside of lane, then you're going to be a lot faster and have a lot more utility in skirmishes, whereas these long-range poke mages are going to be pretty stuck around the middle of the map. When we are against these higher threat melee matchups, we are going to be a lot more reactive. You can dominate bot lane in the 2v2 setting, especially level 1, as these melee supports, they don't have the kill threat level 1. They typically need level 2 or even level 3, and so you can embrace that knowledge and look to extend the trades with a lot of confidence. Not only that, but you should also gain confidence when the wave is on your side of the lane versus these high threat melee supports, as they're going to have no space to all in. So whenever these high threat champions don't have threat, right, if they don't have cooldowns, if they are only level 1, if the wave is close to your side of the tower, then you don't need to give them respect, and then you can really abuse your extended fight and range advantage. Otherwise, versus other enchanters, you are just going to have a lot of tools to dominate them, and we'll get into that a little bit later. In terms of ADCs that she likes to pair up with, given that she is just so blindable, she is going to be able to pair up with almost any ADC. I would say the only ADCs that she really doesn't want to pair up with are ADCs that rely on all-in. Of course, that's going to be something that Soraka can't provide. So ADCs like Kai'Sa, like Samira, maybe a Tristana as well, those are going to be the ones that are the most awkward, but she can help out weak early ADCs like Zeri, like Vayne, in terms of having a stronger early lane, but also matching their scaling, because she can keep them alive in the late game. She's going to pair very well with any other lane dominant ADCs, as her Q is going to do exactly that. So you really shouldn't be worrying about your ADCs picked too much when you're picking Soraka. In terms of recommended bans for Soraka, I would encourage Nami or Sona the most. These champions are very easy to execute, and they are just going to have such an easy outscaling win condition against Soraka, and it's going to feel bad to just give the enemy such an advantage like that. So personally, I ban Nami. If you encounter a lot of Nami or Sona, you can consider banning one of those. The other trouble with Nami and Sona is that they can survive and sustain your laning poke quite a lot, so that they get that outscaling win condition quite easily. Otherwise, if you want to consider banning the other end of the spectrum with champions like Pyke or like Blitzcrank, they do have tremendously high threat and they can give you a really tough time in the laning phase. It's just much harder for those champions to execute their win condition than a Nami or a Sona. But if you find that you have a lot of trouble with those champions, you can consider banning one of those, whichever that gives you more trouble or that you come across in your games the most. Blitzcrank is just that X factor that you never know when he's going to land one hook, and all he needs to do is land one hook to have a huge impact on the game. And Pyke can be very risky if you ever just slightly misstep, or if you don't time your silence to cancel his Q in time. Because on paper, Soraka should counter Pyke with her silence to cancel his Q and with her ult to get teammates out of his ult execute range, but the matchup is quite tricky. The statistics are in Pyke's favor, and I know of several Soraka one-tricks that choose to ban Pyke. Moving on to Soraka's runes. So this is what most people build on Soraka, and they are making some crucial mistakes. We are going to be going airy, so this is just going to be the best for laning poke, it's going to be the best for utility throughout the game with your heals, but the main differences are going to be in the next couple of branches here. So most people are going Mana Flow and Transcendence. This is a mistake. You need to be going Nimbus and Celerity. So Mana Flow and Transcendence, this is going to be the best for scaling, right? You're going to have the most mana, you're going to have the shortest cooldowns, but you're not going to have mana issues if you use your spells deliberately. I'm going to teach you how to do that. I'm going to teach you how to not run out of mana. And then what Nimbus and Celerity is going to help you with is to be a lot more mobile, to keep up with faster paces of games, to make games faster paced yourself, to synergize with your passive that gives you move speed, with your build that is going to give you a little bit of move speed as well. And this is just tying into Soraka's identity as a whole. You don't sit back and scale. You get in the fights, right? You're a combat medic. You're not a Sona or a Seraphine or a Nami that can sit back a screen away and be useful. You need to get into the thick of things and land your Qs. You need to be speedy. And so I've tested this thoroughly. And so normally I like to leave up a little bit of space for personal preference, but I firmly believe that this direction in the runes is optimal, as long as you know how and why we're going to use them. Finally, on the lower branch here, we're going to be going Scorch. Quite a few people do take Gathering Storm, But in terms of Soraka being a lane dominant lane bully, Scorch is going to really help out in that regard. Now for the secondary page, we are going to be going Resolve, and I think we're all aligned here that we really want to take Revitalize. This rune here is basically made for Soraka to give her stronger heals, and that's what she does. In terms of what we're going to back up Revitalize with, here we can do a little bit of mixing and matching. So bone plating is going to be good to keep ourselves alive as much as possible when we are under threat of getting burst. Font of Life is going to be good otherwise, because we can apply this with our Q to get a little bit more healing, and of course we're going to be scaling our healing with our build. So basically ask yourself, do you need bone plating to stay alive versus a lot of short range high burst, or if we're against long range and low burst where this isn't necessary, or this is just going to get triggered by some random spell and not give us much value, then we would go for the Font of Life instead. But most Sorakas do take these. So the last change that needs to be made is we're going to be going Adaptive Force and move speed here instead of double Adaptive Force. As a combat medic, we do want to get our move speed wherever we can. And then finally, we're going to be backing it up with Scaling Health. This is just a very efficient rune shard to take. In extreme circumstances, we can consider flat health. And in those extreme circumstances, we might change our entire rune setup here. So basically, we're going to be going this setup probably 9 out of 10 games at least. But when we are versus a lot of high threat early on in the game, we can consider Guardian. And this is the page that we are going to be running for that, just to stay alive as much as possible, right? And then for the secondaries, we're going to be going Sorcery. We need Celerity to be that combat medic, to have some move speed, and we're going to appreciate having Scorch more than having Nimbus so that we can just poke with our Q as much as possible. Just a little bit more on Nimbus. The reason that this is so powerful is because we're going to be taking Heal and Flash, and so you can trigger Nimbus Cloak basically whenever you want with Heal and with Flash, and getting that burst of move speed is going to be absolutely critical in some skirmishes and some 2v2 fights. But if the way that you are playing Soraka is you're sitting back, you're scaling, you're doing nothing, then you're not going to get value out of Nimbus, you're not going to get value out of Celerity. My goal is to convince you to give this other build of being a combat medic a try, and really dominating early and then moving around the map as much as possible and pouncing on skirmishes. But when we are versus these really high threat burst lanes, then we can consider the flat health to back it up with this. So for lanes that we would consider this build, it would just be an all-in ADC like Samira, or Tristana, or Kai'Sa, maybe even Callista, paired with a strong engager such as Leona or Nautilus or Pike, maybe even Rel. And even in those situations, it's not absolutely necessary to take this setup. I can definitely see an argument for it, but if you do want to sit back and let your ADC get engaged on and then try to extend the fight through them, you can. It's just going to be risky because they might just get one shot. For Soraka's items, so there is no one correct build, but I do want to help you understand what all of her items do first, and then we can mix and match, or we can have a little bit of personal preference here. So the first one is Celestial Opposition for the support quest item. This is going to be good against short range and high burst. Dreammaker, on the other hand, is going to be good when we have an on-hit hyper carry of an ADC who needs to auto attack a lot to do damage and might be a little bit vulnerable as well. This is going to help them do a little bit more damage and stay alive. Otherwise, if none of the above, then Solstice Slayer is going to be a great, just blindable, splashable support item here. Doesn't need a situation to be useful. For boots, we're always going to go Boots of Swiftness, just to really embrace that combat medic identity of hers. Now, moving on to the completed items. I'm quite shocked to see how infrequently Helia is built on this champion. I don't think you should always build it, but it should be in contention for first item rushes. So let's talk about all of the potential first items that Soraka could build and when she may choose to do so. So starting with Helia here, this is an item that is her strongest one item spike. So if the game is very fast paced and the game is going to end before you complete a second item, or the game is going to be practically decided by the time you get your second item, then Helia is going to be the best one item spike. This item has been strong for many patches now. It does an insane amount of work by itself, but the trouble with Helia is that it doesn't provide enough scaling for Soraka. This just provides flat numbers, right? It does flat damage, it gives some flat healing. It doesn't build out of any forbidden idols, so it doesn't scale her healing herself. So the later the game goes on, the further in to the rest of your build that you get, the worse that this item is going to be. It's also going to be bad against long range comps because this relies on you being able to land consistent Qs so that you can apply its effect more readily. So basically we're going to consider Helia first. If you are in very fast-paced games, there's a lot of fighting going on, there are a lot of skirmishes, and this is typically going to be the case in higher elo. So if you're Emerald or even Diamond Plus, games might be really fast and you're going to appreciate this spike quite a lot. Otherwise, Moonstone, this is a fantastic item to scale her healing a lot the later that you get into her build. What Moonstone does is it makes for the strongest 2 item spikes for Soraka. This is the best item to greed and scale the rest of Soraka's build, but as just a standalone 1 item spike, it's not going to be the strongest. This is going to be by far the most common first item for Soraka. As we talked about in runes, people tend to just build for scaling with the mana flow and the transcendence. People are going to tend to greed for scaling with items as well, but this is actually a good item for her. Just pay attention to your pace of games. Are you getting to complete a second and a third item or not? Okay, so what Redemption does, so this is a decent middle ground. It is solid, it is splashable, it is always useful, but it's not going to outperform Helia on 1 item, and it's not going to outscale Moonstone. But you're never going to feel bad in including this item in your build. Moving on to Warmogs now, so this is going to give really strong map and heals uptimes. So you're going to be on the map for a long time because you just get to stay full health. And you're going to have consistent heals because you just get healed up as soon as you do cast your heals, because Soraka's heals cost health. And it also prevents you from getting one-shots. So it sounds amazing, doesn't it? But the problem with Warmogs is that your heals are weak. It doesn't build out of any forbidden idols, of course, and you might end up running out of mana because this doesn't give any mana regen either. But otherwise, it's a really solid item for Soraka. Of course, we don't want to build this first because we're not going to reach the health threshold. So this is going to be earliest in her build, second item or later. So now that we kind of understand what all of these items do, there is no one build that is overpowered on Soraka right now. So you guys need to pay attention to the game, mix and match, and understand what each item provides for her build. With that said, if you don't want to worry about build while you learn Soraka or you focus on other things, then I will give you the most consistent build for Soraka, which is going to be Solstice Slay, Boots of Swiftness, Moonstone, and then Warmogs, and then Redemption. For Soraka's final item, that is going to be Dawncore or Mikhail's Crucible. We're going to go Dawncore in most situations. It's going to be a fantastic 6th item. Otherwise, Mikhail's if we want to have the CC cleansing effect if we reverse a lot of lockdown. And we're probably going to go Mikhail's over Redemption in those situations. So an example final build for Soraka would be Slay, Swifties, Moonstone, Redemption, Warmogs, and Dawncore. I want to run through some quick examples of item builds, just so you could get a sense of the thought process that might go into some of these iterations. So for the first example here, we are against long range, but there's also quite a lot of burst and pick potential from the enemies Ashe and Nunu and Kiana. So in this game, I decided to go Celestial Opposition into Moonstone, into Warmogs, to have decent healing, but still not to get one shot and die. For the second example here, just ignore the BF sword. It was at the enemy Nexus explosion and I wanted to grief item stats for fun, don't worry about it. But for the rest of her build, we could almost go anything in this situation. We could build to prevent ourselves from getting one shot here, or we could build to amplify our healing as much as possible to help our jungler and our mid and our melee ADC here commit and not for them to get one shot. I decided on this game to just go Dreammaker to help my Yasuo ADC and as much healing as possible on 2 items to keep the allies alive in these fast explosive skirmishes with Moonstone and Redemption. For the next example here, we were dominating 2v2 really hard and I wanted to keep my foot on the gas and absolutely take over the game with echoes of Helia Rush. It also happened that we were versus quite a short range enemy comp, so it was quite easy to be able to proc Helia and land my Qs. So to wrap up Soraka's items, for first we're probably going to be going Helia or Moonstone, and probably Moonstone most of the time. For second item, always Moonstone, if Helia first, otherwise Redemption or Warmogs. Third item, it's going to be the opposite of what we went between, Warmogs or Redemption. And then fourth or the last fully completed item is probably going to be Dawncore for most of the time. Of course, the other 2 items are going to be our support quest item and Boots of Swiftness. In terms of components for items, we're going to be normally prioritizing the health components rather than the AP or the mana regen components because we need to be finding Qs. Remember, we're a combat medic. we're going to be in fights, we're going to be landing Qs, and not just sitting back, so we are going to need the health. Otherwise, we're going to be rushing Boots of Swiftness before any other completed items, unless you're dominating 2v2 lane and you want to rush Helia instead. Then we would potentially sit on tier 1 brown boots before completing Echoes of Helia. For summoner spells, we're going to be going heal and flash. Hopefully for obvious reasons, but if not, heal is going to help us proc our Nimbus Cloak whenever we want. It's going to help us have more healing, and it's going to be amplified by our Revitalize rune and any other items that we might take that amplifies our healing power. Flash because it's flash and that's what you take on every champion. The only alternative you can consider to heal is exhaust, but this is only if your ADC takes heal themselves. What you should do in champ select is to ask your ADC to take something else. At the moment, barrier is very strong for ADCs. Get them to take barrier and you to take heal. If they're stubborn or if they don't listen, then you can consider exhaust instead if your ADC insists on heal. Moving on to skill order, so we can see that by far the most common builds, both are going 3 points into W. Whether you take W or E level 2, that's like the main difference over here. But this is missing out on Soraka's identity of being a lane bully. So I firmly believe that you do need to invest more than 1 point in Q in the early game in lane. The question is how many. So I have tried 3 points Q into W max myself. That felt like it was too much of an investment. I felt like the game opened up and I was in the skirmishes where I wanted to have stronger healing a little bit faster than this. So then I played around with 2 points Q, and I found that this was the sweet spot. So with 2 points Q, you get to dominate lane, and then you get to reach your 5 points into W reasonably fast, and then it's just a great middle ground. Because the thing about Soraka's Q is that it applies rejuvenation. If you land your Q and then press your W, you give that rejuvenation to your ally. And so those are the two main reasons why I think you do need more than 1 point in Q early on. So you can punish lanes harder, and so that it also still gives your healing more value. What you won't see here is 3 points E. So I have tried this, and this is an option for longer range lanes. When you can't consistently land your Q, then you can put more points into E and then get that poke down. The problem with this is that outside of lane, all of those points in E really doesn't do anything. So I wouldn't recommend playing around with any points into E. For the abilities section here, I want to give a quick rundown of what her abilities do. And then what I'm going to do is go over the theory of each of her abilities to get the most out of them as possible. So let's start off with a quick rundown. What her passive does is it gives Soraka a bunch of move speed when allies are low health. So this is kind of one of the reasons why I consider her a battle medic, so that she can run around and, you know, get in range to heal people. Her Q, this is her incredibly stacked ability that does magic damage, it slows, it gives Soraka rejuvenation, which gives her health and move speed. And this is also going to synergize with her W by giving rejuvenation to the targets that she heals. So what her Q looks like is just that traveling projectile that hits in an area of effect. Her W, this is just going to heal an ally. And if you have landed your Q, then your W is going to give them the rejuvenation buff, as we can see up there. So this is going to not only give your ADC or your teammate more health over time, it's going to give them movement speed, and it's also going to make her W, her heal, cost much less health. As you can see here, the health cost is going to be reduced by 85%. So it's so important to be able to land your Q before you press your W for all of these reasons. Next, her E, this is going to place an area on the ground that does an initial burst of magic damage, and then anyone that is in or remains inside that field is going to be silenced, and then at the end, rooting any champions left inside that area. So what that's going to look like is that field, silence, 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 at the end, boom, they get rooted. Finally, Soraka's ultimate, this is just going to immediately heal all of her teammates, and it's going to heal more for teammates that are low HP, below 40%. Moving on to the Q theory for Soraka. So this is going to explain exactly how you want to use your Q and why we want to use it these ways. So the first thing is, this isn't the easiest spell to land, especially against ranged champions, because it's rather slow and it is of middling range. So we need a reason to press it. We need to give ourselves the best chance possible to use it. And the first strategy that we're going to use is to punish last hits with our Q. Instead of just wildly flinging it out whenever we feel like it and kind of hoping that it hits them, we're going to use it when the enemy, especially the enemy ADC, is going for a last hit. So then they have to choose between the last hit or getting hit by our Q. and a lot of the time they're going to choose going for that last hit and getting hit by our Q. So we're going to have a look at a few examples of that. Here, of course, I am the Soraka, and then the Jin is going to be walking forwards, and I know with his body language, he's kind of hanging around to go for this last hit, so I'm going to be walking forwards, and he's going for the last hit, he gets hit by my Q. Awesome. We're going to have a look at a few more examples here. So I am against the Twitch here, and I know that he is going to be going for some last hits under tower, especially this cannon, right? ADCs are always going to choose to last hit the cannon, and then as his last hit goes out, I'm throwing out my Q, and then I get a very easy Q land. Another example from the same game here. Here's another cannon. I know that he wants to walk forwards to try and get in range to last hit it, so guaranteed Q to land here. The last example here, so we're going to be against a Jinx, and she's going to be walking forwards, looking to, you know, hit the minions. And she actually misses this last hit because this minion died to some of her minions, but the main point is that we are trying to have a really high success rate on our Q, and this is one of the reasons why you don't need mana flow, because if you have a really high success rate on your Qs, and with enough strategy and practice you absolutely can, then you don't need all of the mana from that rune. The next strategy for Soraka's Q is Pokemon battles. So this is a concept that I talk about to help you get your Q off successfully, of course, and if any of you guys have grown up playing Pokemon, whenever, let's say this is us, whenever you lock eyes with an opponent, you look at them, they look at you, there's a big exclamation mark that appears above their head, and then you're battling no matter what. There's nothing you can do about it. That's kind of what we're looking for here as well. You want to lock eyes with an opponent, and then you battle. You use your spell, they use their spell, and that's going to be good because of how stacked Soraka's Q is. But remember, this is going to be a 1v1 battle. So first I'm going to show you what a bad Pokemon battle looks like. I'm going to not lock eyes and take a Pokemon battle 1v1 down here with the Lulu. I'm going to be running into two people, and then of course I'm just going to get 2v1'd, and that's a bad idea. Running into two people, I take damage from two of them, and then it's not going to be very good. One more example here, brute forcing these trades for science. Not very good. Now let's have a look at what a good Pokemon battle is going to look like. It's going to be a 1v1, typically on the side of the lane so that it remains a 1v1. Locked eyes. He's here, I'm here. He's going to use his spell, I'm going to use my spell. And we are Soraka. So guess who comes out ahead in this exchange? We do. That is just the nature of our Q and our champion. So a good Pokemon battle is typically going to be on the side of the lane, typically on the bottom side of the lane. It is going to be waiting for them to commit with their spells and their body language so that you can guarantee your spell. You're not trying to like space them and out kite or dance around them. You're just saying, okay, you use your spell, I use my spell. It's guaranteed to land and it's going to be successful. Now, if we want to kind of tie these 2 points in together, if we want to try to punish the last hits from the ADC, and if we want to do a Pokemon battle, we can kind of force a Pokemon battle, right? Because the question could be, what if the enemy support doesn't give us this opportunity? Then what we're going to do is we're going to look to pressure the ADC on their last hits, and then that is going to, we're going to be pressuring the ADC, right? So the enemy support is then going to try to relieve that pressure, and then we can generate a Pokemon battle. If the enemy support doesn't, then on every single last hit that the enemy ADC goes for, we're just going to be pressuring him. It's going to be overwhelming, and we're basically just going to win the lane 2v1. So remember that you can use pressuring the ADC last hits to generate Pokemon battles. And in that situation, it's a win-win. Either we punish the last hit or we get a good trade with the enemy support. But also remember that if you're keeping these points in mind, the enemy support probably has no idea about these concepts, and they're not going to be trying to relieve pressure on last hits, and you're just going to be able to dominate regardless. We can also use Soraka's Q from fog. This is going to be the last strategy to help us land it, rather than just standing out in the open and hoping for the best. What we can do, as we're going to see here, is move into the bush, pressure from fog, and then it's going to be harder to react, right? Because if they constantly see your whereabouts, they can see exactly where you are, they can react to the animation of your spell being thrown out. But if you're in fog, they don't know exactly where you're standing, and they're not going to be able to react as quickly to the incoming projectile. And that's exactly what happens over here. Now, this last point isn't going to be about landing her Q, but this is just another way that you can use her Q to get a lot of value from it, as if Soraka needed this. So this is going to be using your Q to scout vision. When you throw out your Q, you are going to provide vision in an area when you throw it out. So we're just going to have a look at that here. So I'm linking up with my jungler, and then I'm just a little bit nervous about them potentially being in tri-bush. I'm not comfortable in face checking. You shouldn't be comfortable face checking very frequently on a champion like Soraka. So then we can throw out our Q, and then as you can see, it provides all of that vision around her Q. And if I were to draw a little bit more precisely, it's actually going to be a bigger area than just the projectile. So you don't even have to land your Q or be about to land your Q to receive vision. Okay, now we're in the same game, just a little bit further on. If I'm ever scared of face checking, I'm just going to Q a bush instead. Scared of that bush, throw out a Q, get some vision. Is there anyone in this bush? Doesn't seem like it. Maybe they could be in this bush. They're not there. Get some more vision. I see a ward be placed down. I know they're contesting around this area. Let me throw another Q to see if anyone's there. And this is just, it's so spammable. It's such a short cooldown. It costs so little mana that this alleviates one of Soraka's biggest weaknesses in being so squishy and immobile in terms of face checking bushes. Here's a visual of exactly what I mean when I say it doesn't need to land. So I'm going to cast my Q at the start of the game to see if anyone is spread in this bush over here. We can see the vision that it gives. Nunu doesn't get hit by the Q, but I still see him there. So he might think that I don't have this information, but I do. For Soraka's W theory, there is a lot that you need to understand to get the most out of this spell. So the first is target selection. Whoever is in threat of dying. This could mean that you're healing a 50% health teammate over a 1% health teammate if that 1% health teammate is backing off, is out of the fight, and they don't need your heals as much as your teammate who is actually in threat. I didn't have any example clips for this point, but just keep that in mind that your target selection for your W is going to be important. The next point is to cast our W after our Q has landed, but it's not as simple as that. Once you land your Q, there is a projectile that travels back to you to give you rejuvenation. You have to wait until that projectile reaches you before your W is going to be empowered by it. So we're going to have a look at a bad W here first. I'm going to land a Q on the enemy, and then here's the projectile over here. It's going to travel towards me, and if I cast my W before it reaches me, then it's going to be an unempowered W, which is much worse than the empowered W from landing your Q. There, I press my W, and then you can see I don't have the rejuvenation buff yet, and the projectile hasn't reached me. Here the rejuvenation is, and then my poor teammate does not have the bonus healing. Let's look at what a good W is going to look like then after I land my Q. So I land my Q, I get the rejuvenation, and then I press my W on my teammate who is going to have, as you can see there, that rejuvenation buff. So it is crucial to have that little bit of patience to wait until you actually have the rejuvenation. A bonus good use of your W is going to be to wait for heal cuts to wear off on your allies, because people are going to be building heal cut a lot against Soraka. So here I'm going to land my Q, but I notice that my ADC still has the heal cut here because the Nami built an Oblivion Orb to try and disrupt my healing. So I'm going to be patient, I'm going to wait, and then as soon as the heal cut is off and I still have the rejuvenation buff here, then I can get that full value W. One more example here, I'm going to wait until the heal cut has worn off, and then I'm going to get a bit of a stronger heal. So sometimes you're not going to have the freedom to wait until the buff wears off, or even until the projectile reaches you, but just as long as you understand that to get the best value from your W, your teammates shouldn't have heal cut on them, and you should have your rejuvenation on yourself. Another good use of Soraka's W is to apply the Airy buff to your ally, because it can heal your teammate, but of course it's also going to give that shield through Airy, and so if you're going to get value out of Airy, then you can consider doing that. Maybe your ally has tanked a tower shot and you want to prevent as much damage as possible, or in this example, they are trying to hold a freeze, and then you can give them that extra shield from your W. Understanding Soraka's W a little bit more, so this spell is incredibly powerful when you have 5 points in it and when you have a couple of items to really get as much healing as possible, but it also allows you to reach that break point of having 2 Ws during your rejuvenation duration. So you land a Q and you get 2 empowered Ws off. So we're going to have a look at a quick visual of that. Here is my Jhin, who is practically dead, and then what we're going to do is we're going to land 1 Q here, wait until the rejuvenation applies on myself, and then get 2 Ws off. See how I get 2 W's off there before the rejuvenation passive has worn off, and then the result of that with my 2 items is he's gone from basically 1 health to around 80-85%. So this is when you have reached the peak of your U power trough, right? You're incredibly strong early, you're punishing, and then here you're between 1 to 2 items, and then here you have 5 points W, you have 2 items, you land a Q, and then your teammates are just going to stay full health. The last bonus point for Soraka's W, you can press your W on an ally from Fountain to give them a shield to help them in a fight or to just get an assist, if you're greedy. For Soraka's E theory, I'm going to start with what a bad Soraka E looks like. That is just going to be throwing out her E to do a little bit of poke on one person. This spell has a long cooldown, it has 2 instances of damage, it has a valuable silence and a root. So we're not going to just throw this out to poke one person and pretend that that is the best way to use this spell. Good ways to use this spell. The first option is to find an E to poke 2 people, typically 2 ranged champions. So let's have a look at that here. I'm going to wait until they're near each other, and then I'm going to get the damage on both of them, which is of course better than just one. What we want to do with our E is to preserve it against melee support matchups that have high threat. This spell is going to be very important in surviving all ins. If you just throw this out willy-nilly against engagers and other melee supports, you're going to be in a rough time. So let's have a look at what I mean here. This is going to be a bad E. I throw it out. Not only am I just poking one person, but now I am crucially putting this spell on cooldown against a high threat matchup. And so now I have nothing to deter this gank, whereas I otherwise would be able to use my E to potentially create a zone to help my ADC get away. Speaking of zoning, we're going to want to use our E to create zones, whether it's after our Q has slowed them or otherwise. So we're just going to have a look at a few examples here where I am going to place my E on the ground to prevent the enemies from, moving forwards to kill us or moving away to get away from our threat. As you can see here, these placements of the E are very deliberate. Well, I'm not just throwing them out randomly on the ground. I'm telling the opponents that that they have to make a choice, right? Whether they have to move inefficiently to avoid the root, or if they move efficiently, they get rooted by the second component of the E. Okay, so the zoning aspect, very important for Soraka's E. Now I want to get a little bit more specific on how to use Soraka's E after her Q. So a bad use of this is going to be throwing out your Q and then immediately throwing out your E. You want to wait until the enemy has been slowed by your Q. So in this first example here, the enemy is not slowed before I get my E out, and so then they just barely make it out of the range of my E, and they don't get rooted. So now we're going to have a look at an example of a good use of E. This is going to be as the slow from the Q lands. So what we're going to see here is I throw out my Q, I'm not pressing my E, and then they get slowed, and then I press my E. And so now if they try to walk forward and get out of the E zone, they're slowed, they can't make it out in time, they get that crucial root applied to them. Now let's look at that one more time, and I want to talk about more specifically the placement of the E. There's no easy solution I can give you here. You're going to have to feel it out and play around with it a little bit. But the idea is that you want to place your E so that they are stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they run forwards, they get rooted. If they run backwards, they're moving inefficiently, and then they're just going to be wildly out of position. So you kind of want to place the E slightly off center, right? Here's the center of the E, and Jinx was around here when I casted it, so then it's going to be slightly in front of the enemy. The problem if I threw my E like this is, sure, she wouldn't be able to move forwards, but then she can escape the zone threat without moving much at all, and then she can kind of be moving again. So you want to find that sweet spot where if she runs backwards, she has to run quite a far distance to get out of the zone, and if she runs forwards, she still gets rooted. And so that's basically what happened here. This was a really well-placed E because she's running forwards the whole time, and she just barely can't make it out of it. So if she did instead choose to try and run backwards, she's going to be running backwards for the maximum distance possible and just be basically rooted as well. Here we're going to have a look at a bad E. It's going to be timed well but placed poorly. So I land my Q, I get the slow, but now I place my E and it's not off center, right? It's not kind of like this where the center is here and then she's a little bit inside. This is on center, or even worse, slightly forwards of the center. So now the Lulu is easily going to be able to walk out of the route, and then it hasn't been effective. So timing and placement for your E to get effective zones, very important. Now there is a lot of skill ceiling to Soraka's E, and one of those skill ceilings is actually casting it on TP locations. So let's have a look at that. What I mean is that there's going to be a TP channeling, and then you place your E on the ground so that when they spawn, they are silenced for a period, and then they kind of walk out of the circle in time before they get rooted. Here there's a TP. I'm going to place my silence field on the ground, and then they're going to spawn, and then they're going to get rooted after a short time. I don't want them to get immediately rooted, right? I want them to be silenced for a duration so that they can't do much anyway, and then they don't have enough time to move out of the E zone. So here he got silenced for about half a second and then rooted for the E root duration, and then he's just going to get one shot. In this next example, I'm going to be cancelling a channeling spell, and that spell is going to be Jin's ult. So we get caught in a sticky situation here. Jin starts channeling his ult, and then I plot my E down on the ground, and he only gets 2 out of his 4 shots there. And not only can you cancel channeling spells, you can also cancel bases. And your E, given it immediately applies on the ground and it has a much longer range than your Q or your auto attack, can be very handy in stopping recalls. Here, the Twitch is recalling. He's almost going to complete his recall. I wouldn't be able to cancel it without my E, but using your E to cancel bases is great. Another crucial use of your E is to be able to prevent flashes, because when you are silenced, you don't have the ability to use summoner spells. So what I'm going to do here is I notice that the enemy Ahri is getting rooted by the LeBlanc, and I want to get my E out here first, because if I walk forwards to get into Q range and then I throw my Q out, she's going to have time to potentially flash out. So I'm going to use my E to prevent the flash and to kind of chain CC follow up with my teammates. So she gets rooted by the LeBlanc E, she gets silenced by my E, and then she's just going to die without being able to escape. We're going to have a look at a few more examples of this, because this is absolutely critical. This can sometimes mean that you are using your E before your Q in the situations where you need to prevent flashes. So here, my jungler is ganking. You can see them on the minimap over here. They are just up here right now, and I don't want them to be able to flash away from the gank. So the Amumu Q comes out, and then I silence them, because I know that they probably want to flash away from the Amumu Q, right? They're not just going to flash before the Amumu Q comes out in case he then holds it and uses on them later. So they get silenced, they get rooted by my jungler, and then my second instance of E procs, and they get rooted, and then they're just dead. So her E can be an incredibly powerful tool in skirmishes and ganks. This is also going to be another E to prevent the flash. So the only way that this enemy Diana can possibly escape the situation is by walking up to this wall and then flashing over here. She's not going to have time to walk all the way around here. She doesn't have any other exit strategies available. So I'm going to realize this and place my E on the ground here so that she can't flash, right? Because now if she stands here, there's no way she's making it over here. If she tries to walk through here, she's not going to have enough time to get over there to flash over the wall. So notice what happens. She backs away, she doesn't have that out anymore, and now she just has to kind of commit to the fight, and then we clean up. Now, if you are building Echoes of Helia, what you can do is use your E to generate a stack of your Helia. So here, I'm not versed short-range champions, I'm not going to be able to land my Q. And so instead, I just walk up here, I get an E onto the Bard. As we can see here, it gives me a stack of my Helia, and now my W is going to do a lot more healing. Moving on to Soraka's R theory, so there is a very high skill cap for using Soraka's R, and it's not just as simple as pressing R when your teammates are on low health. It's about multitasking. You need to keep an eye on your teammates' health bars on the minimap down here. You need to be aware of these icons, and if they start to deplete a lot, then you need to assess the situation. So you need to keep track of the health bars. You need to use F keys to have a look at the fights to see if you need to ult or not. You need to be able to multitask, right? Because you can't just be AFKing in your fountain whenever you do this. You might be in lane, you might be looking to trade or shove or help your ADC as well. So this is an example of a spell that has a pretty low skill floor. Like if your teammates are low and you press R, you're going to get some value, but it has an incredibly high skill ceiling to use optimally. So let's just have a look at some examples and see what I'm talking about here. As we can see on the minimap, there's some action unfolding, and so I'm going to be multitasking here. I want to hit the tower plate. I want to potentially punish the Jinx on her last hits, but I also want to F key here. So I'm having a look at the fight here, and I want to ult someone who is low, right? They want to be below 40% health so I get the bonus healing, but I also want to ult someone who is in need of the ult, right? If they get healed, that is going to be very impactful in the fight. Kind of similar to target selection for your W. You don't want to W someone who is low but out of the fight. You want to W someone who really needs the heal. So here I'm just watching, and then I notice that Tom is low HP, but he's out of the fight, right? So I don't want to press my R right now because it's not going to impact the skirmish. Instead, I'm going to hold it and keep watching, and then my Warwick jumps in. And so now I'm going to ult because I believe that he is in need of my ult to stay alive in that fight. So here there's going to be a period of multitasking. I notice that there's a fight erupting around mid, but I also want to still be able to lane 2v2, right? So I'm having a look, seeing how the fight is playing out, but still pressuring the lane as much as possible. I want to potentially disrupt recalls or maintain the shove or prevent them from following up on the skirmish while still watching. And then I notice Jin over here and I kind of fail in the multitasking. I miss my Q. So this is what I mean with the high skill ceiling. I'm still kind of trying to multitask, trying to play 2 screens at once. And then I eventually determined that my ult was not needed for the fight at all. And then I'm still going to play on my screen here. And then there's another fight that's going on. I'm trying to clear the pink. And you just want to get comfortable with using your F keys and just giving it a go. It's going to feel very uncomfortable, but you need to be able to control your champion and monitor a skirmish away from yourself. I failed here. I ulted way too late here, but I hope you can get an appreciation of the multitasking that is important. But what you want to make sure that you don't do is to pull a Bwippo and just be AFK, standing and watching the other side of the map to use your ult well. You need to learn the multitasking. So I just want to reiterate that you want to use your ult when your teammates are low HP and in threat of dying, not just low HP. So here's going to be some more multitasking. I'm going to keep my eye on what's going on bot. And if I think that they're going to die, then I'll ult, right? Because they were getting kind of low. I would have the bonus heal from my ult, but I don't think that they're going to die. And so then I can preserve my ult cooldown. You also want to make sure that even if your teammates are in a fight and they're low, that you're not wasting your ult if they're going to die anyway. So in this example, I'm monitoring what's going on up here. My TF is wildly out of position against a Riven and a LeBlanc. He's definitely going to die. And so I'm just keeping my eye on it. Maybe if I ult him, he can kill the Riven. Then I determine there's no way that's going to happen, so I just let him die. So ideally, your ults are always pivotal, right? They are crucial in turning around a skirmish so that you win, or keeping a teammate alive when they otherwise wouldn't survive. Here's going to be an example of a bad ult when my teammate is just going to die and I use it anyway. So here my Jin is wildly out of position, and then I just kind of panic ults, but there's no way he was going to survive that. There's no way he was going to get a kill on the back end. So a bad Soraka ult is when the ult is too late and your ally has already died, or when they are going to be dead regardless of if you press ult. A good ult is going to be used on a low health teammate in a close fight. A beautiful Soraka ult is going to be used on a low HP member in a close fight immediately after the enemy has committed to the kill, so that they don't see that information and then they decide to back off. They have committed wholeheartedly to the fight, and now that there's nothing they can do about it. Now I want to talk about concepts for Soraka outside of exactly how to use his spells. And the first concept we're going to be talking about is to start in lane. This is just what we're looking to do in Season 14 in general, because junglers have a very easy time clearing fast enough and staying healthy. They don't need your leash. But especially on Soraka, who has such a short Q cooldown and is such a powerful spell, her level 1 is scary, and her extended fights are very scary as well on level 1. I've lost count of how many times I've killed bot level 1 or gotten a really favorable trade, and we're going to have a look at some of those examples now. Okay, so here's the first example. Starting in lane, they are going to enter the lane, and then we're going to get a nice start to the lane with a chunk there with a Q and an auto attack. So just one more time. It's very likely that most people are just going to enter the lane through this way as well. Whether they try to move in with the wave here, or whether they come to lane later, right? Whether they leash on the minimap here and then they move down. Either way, start the lane off on the right foot here with Q plus auto attack into disengage. Next example here, I'm just telling my ADC how I want the fight to go as well. We're just going to find a short and concise trade and then back off. The problem with trying to extend the trade is if we are in the enemy's minion wave, then we're going to be taking a lot of minion damage, and that's going to be a little bit trickier. Okay, there we go. Q plus auto attack, and now lane start, the enemy support is almost half HP already. And this is just very hard for the enemies to counter, right? Because they have to predict that we're standing here and then walk around the tribush through the river over here and then hope that they can avoid any type of poke. And also if they arrive in lane and there's like a big fist fight with no minions, then Soraka can come out ahead with her short and overpowered Q ability. Okay, same point. Let's just get another example so I can really drive this point home. What I want to show you guys here is just how powerful our extended trades can be. And so here's going to be an example of just like a fist fight with no minions. So I find a Q and they want to stand and fight. I say, okay, you know what? I'm Soraka. I have such a powerful spell in my Q. I'm happy to take a fight. And this is also a little bit more than Soraka. I saw that Milio, he was standing here and he kind of wasted his Q, so I know he doesn't have his E, which would be a little bit scarier in this situation. I know that Caitlyn is also not the scariest extended fighter for an ADC, right? She wants to shove poke pressure. She's probably going to take fleet footwork as well, and Israel with PTA is going to do more. But outside of that, if you just embrace Soraka's strength, then a lot of good things are going to happen with extended all-ins at level 1. And so you can see how confident I was this whole time in just spamming auto attacks with Ares, spamming Q, and having complete confidence. Okay, so the next concept is to use the bushes against ranged matchups and weave in auto attacks to force mistakes or to find chunks. So we're going to have a look at the same VOD that we did previously, but now a little bit later on and from the perspective of really using the bushes to our advantage. And so whenever I am standing in the bush like this, they can't see me, right? And the whole point of that is so that they can't freely walk up because I might auto attack them or Q them for free. They can't ever control the bushes. They have to kind of clump up together. They don't know exactly where I'm standing, so it's harder for them to land spells against me. And what ends up happening is they normally just get overwhelmed by the pressure in the bushes, and then they're just going to drop a ward instead. So let's see what that can look like. Walking out, find an auto Q, dip into fog. See how confident I am standing in the bush here. I know they don't have vision here. My auto was outside of the bush. I walk back in, and then I am not in vision anymore. Another free auto attack, and then they just get sick of how much pressure I'm exerting and they ward the bush, and then fine, I'll allow myself to get flushed out. Now they don't have a ward and they could be more susceptible to getting ganked or to me from pressuring this bush when they might not have a ward for it. We're going to move a little bit later into this game and we're going to have a look at the exact same concept. I take control of the bush, she doesn't know where I am, and now I get to have so much presence. And that's how I ended up finding that free Q and that auto attack without them being able to respond because they don't have vision of me. We're going to be controlling from the bushes. Here I am in fog, and I'm just going to find a Q and an auto attack, and they just can't respond to this trade because I'm cutting vision here. And so then I'm dipping in and out of fog, right? I walked out, and then they had to walk away, and then they're trying to walk forwards to hit me, but then I'm back in fog, and they're getting tethered. They really can't do much. I find a free auto attack there. And then I find a Pokemon battle over there, and this is just overwhelming for the enemies to be able to deal with. I think you'll be surprised at how much you can dominate early lane if you start in lane, you find a quick Q plus auto attack trade and back off, and then you pressure from the bushes, especially against ranged matchups. Against melee matchups, it's going to be a little bit different. Level 1, you can be an absolute psycho and kill them. Level 2 and onwards, they might have some threats, so you're going to be a little bit more reactive and respectful of the bushes. But there's basically no champion that you need to respect level 1. The next concept is to use our Boots of Swiftness spike. So when we do have Boots of Swiftness, we're a lot faster, of course. We can be more fluid on the map. We can start to become that combat medic that we are destined to be. Before you have Boots of Swiftness, then it's more of an investment for you to move. It's less likely that you are going to successfully get to a fight before the result is determined. It's more likely that if you leave bot lane, then you're going to be too slow to return and you're going to lose something. So just really embrace these Boots of Swiftness spike, and we're going to have a look at a few examples. The first one here, I got my tier 2 boots, and now I am going to consider roaming. I'm going to be piling between mid and bot. This is a good habit to get into when you do have your Boots of Swiftness, and now I'm just going to see if it's likely that I can get something done here. If not, then I can just pass straight back towards bot and we wouldn't have lost out on too much. I'm trying to stay in fog, and then this is where we get that E out to prevent her from escaping, and this wouldn't have happened outside of our tier 2 boots. We're going to go forwards until the next time we're in base, and this is going to be a pretty similar situation where I'm considering pathing towards action. You see that there was a fight going on top here, so I started to path through mid so that I could potentially react to a fight if it spilled down here. I'm keeping my eye on this. I think that there's no way I get here in time, so I don't want to waste my time moving there. I'm looking towards mid, and now it's just whether I think that I could get anything done with this roam or not. If not, because my jungle has shown top and he died, if I see the enemy support or the enemy jungle nearby here, then I'm just going to leave. And so that's what happens, right? I throw out my Q here to get some vision. I saw the Lulu nearby, and then I say, okay, the gig is up. I'm not going to get anything done here, because we're mainly looking for number advantage, right? If we are faster than the enemy support, then we can make a crucial pick or swing a fight. But if the enemy support is around mid as well, then I'm not really interested in just having an ARAM face-off with the enemies. Because remember, we are going to be fast with Celerity and with our move speed shard and with Swifty's boots. So if Lulu is here, then I can move bot before Lulu can move bot, and then we can win. We can create some pressure bot, and then Lulu responds, and then I can just move elsewhere. So try to find those number advantages with Boots of Swiftness. I will say that this is a lower priority concept for players that are below Emerald. You just want to get really comfortable with understanding how to use your spells and how to dominate the 2v2 for as long as possible. How to roam effectively is complex, it's dynamic, and it is mainly something you want to focus on if you are Emerald and above. Let's have a look at another example here. So we're basing, we're going to get our tier 2 boots. And you don't have to kill the enemy to get a successful roam off either. So we're going to be pathing between mid and bot, keeping our options open. And so we spot out the enemy jungle, we spot the enemy's pink, and we clear the pink. We allow some pressure for my mid laner to be able to pink that mid bush that we saw. And so even though we didn't kill the enemy mid laner, we got bot river control for my mid laner, so now he's a lot more safe, he has more pressure, the enemy jungler is going to have a harder time, and all the meanwhile, we basically didn't lose anything bot because I was so fast to get there and so fast to get back towards bot. The last point that I want to talk about for how much mobility we're going to have is to dodge skill shots. And I'm going to put a Masters Plus label onto this one. If you really want to reach the limits with this champion and with your movement speed, then you need to understand how to dodge skill shots and kind of read the situation. So let's have a look at a few examples of that. This is not necessary at all for you to climb. And so given how fast we are, what's going to happen here is Bard is going to try to ult me. I'm going to dodge that. And then I'm going to dodge basically all of Aatrox's spells on the back end as well. And this is only going to be possible if anticipating what the enemy skill shots are going to look like. Final example for that is going to be coming up here. I have my Boots of Swiftness. Yone is going to try and kill me on the back end. I'm going to dodge one Q, dodge another Q, dodge another Q. And there you go. So we know what type of trades we're looking for when we are Soraka versus ranged. We're going to be looking for the Pokemon battles. I want to talk about wave management, and I'm not going to show any specific examples, but all I want you guys to think about is to maintain a minion advantage. Maintain a small minion HP advantage. This is going to help you to be able to stack waves, to be able to pressure from the bushes like we saw, to be able to find a crash into base when you need to have more freedom to walk up and force trades. The danger that comes with maintaining a small HP advantage or maintaining the shove is that you are susceptible to getting ganked. So when you are scared of the jungler, then we can look to freeze instead. So we're basically choosing between the shove or the freeze. We're going to maintain the shove if we don't respect threat, and we're going to try to set up a freeze if we do respect the enemy threat. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the Soraka versus melee support matchup. You want to be a little bit more reactive. You don't want to invite them to engage on you and potentially kill you. I mentioned earlier that if your ADC is the one that gets engaged on and you use all of your spells well, then you can disengage that relatively well. You just make sure that you're respecting their engage range. But also what you can look to do is to dominate 2v2 as much as possible before you have your swiftness boot spike. And that's what this clip is going to be. As you can see, I have only my brown boots here. I decided to index into health to make sure that I never got one shot against a scary lane like this. And I'm not going to be roaming on this window. Instead, I'm going to be nurturing a freeze. So while the enemy support roams, I'm not going to emotionally compensate and try to run over there. I'm not going to get there in time. I'm too slow. I would rather generate an advantage bot, while Leona generates an advantage on the top side of the map. And this is just the price that you can pay for playing an Enchanter or playing Soraka against engagers. You just have to embrace reality. And whatever happens topside, as long as the enemy ADC is bleeding wave after wave, then it's an acceptable outcome. And if they don't hard win the top fight, then the enemy ADC is going to be at a huge deficit for no gain. And when all is said and done, the enemy ADC has lost a tremendous amount of minions here. You should also gain confidence when the wave is on your side of the lane. Remember when we said that if the enemy has threat, then you're looking to freeze instead, because that's going to nullify their threat, right? If the wave is under your tower or, on your side of the lane, then they have no space to kill you. So when they have no space to kill you, when they have no threat, you can have some confidence, you can be a little bit more proactive than you otherwise would. And that's what we're going to see over here. I'm really confident, I'm daring them to engage because I know if they do, then they don't have the space to kill and I can extend that fight, because that extended fight is where we're going to thrive. Here's another example of not only starting in lane, but not giving melee supports the respect that they want level 1. Confident movement. After we dodge that, we're going to start running forwards. You can see my on the way ping, and we're going to get a huge chunk here, a favorable trade, because they don't have the threat level 1. Once again, I want to draw our attention to what can happen when we extend the trade against melee. So even when I wasted my E, I let my ADC get engaged on, I land my Q, I get my W off on them. I'm going to be running forwards, I'm going to find my second Q, use my range advantage, and get all of that sustained back. And so at the end of the day, we're in a pretty good spot, regardless of the start of the trade. And if I used my E well to prevent even more damage from my ADC and for them to take more damage on the back end, then it's going to be an overwhelming win for us. So let's pretend that I did have my E up here. We have two options on how we want to use it. We can either use our E to prevent the enemy ADC from following up by slightly off-center E towards the ADC over here, so that they just get silenced and rooted, or they have to run around and then they're not doing damage. Or we can just place it on the enemy engager so that they can't use all of their spells. I typically prefer using it on the enemy ADC to prevent their follow-up, because once the engager has engaged, they don't have much use left. But you can absolutely make an argument for either one, as long as you're not the one getting engaged on because you can't heal yourself. I now want to talk about the crash into base minigames. Remember when I said that we want to maintain the shove so that we have the option to crash at base? I want to explain the importance of that now. So what happens is the enemy ADC ends up dying here, and whenever you have a successful window, or whenever you need to base, whether you have a lot of gold or whether you're very low on HP, here I am almost dead, so I really want to find a window to base, what we want to do is crash the wave into the enemy tower first. Now the more waves that we can crash into the enemy tower safely, the better, right? Because then we collectively will have more gold to spend and more EXP. So initially I thought that my ADC was just going to shove this one wave and then I'm going to channel my base and let him do that. But then I realized that maybe we can hang around and shove the next wave. This is going to be a bit greedy, but the enemy ADC did die. And we have a lot of vision. As we can see on the minimap here, we know that the enemy jungle isn't nearby. We're going to slow shove this wave, and then the next wave is going to arrive into the lane, and then we're going to shove this one. And then we can find a base, and we're not going to miss out on any minions because the wave has crashed into the enemy tower. We've killed all of the minions. It's going to be slow pushing back into us. And this is just a really good habit for you to get into, to really embrace this crash into base minigame. If you can win 2v2 and then find a crash into base, that's how you're going to consolidate that lead and really start to snowball. Let's have a look at some more crash into base minigames. So we're going to get a hugely favorable trade here. Enemy ADC ends up dying. I embraced my extended all-in threat there. And now we want to find a crash into base, right? So that's what we're going to look to do. We're low, we have gold to spend, so let's shove. You can see I'm using my Q, I'm using my auto attacks to get the shove here, and then we're going to want to go home. Now, the enemy Nami, you know, she's in high elo as well. She understands that we need to crash into base, and she wants to disrupt that. Right now, she's disrupting the crash, right? She's going to struggle to disrupt our base because she's so low, and she'd have to run through this wave and just die. But this is good from what she's doing, and then I'm going to ensure that our wave does end up crashing by running forwards and ensuring that the wave reaches the tower. If I didn't do that and the enemy Nami just kind of hung around and held the wave out here and the wave never crashed, then the following wave that is entering the lane is just going to be denied, right? Because all of our minions are just going to easily kill that. And so the whole idea is just so that we don't end up losing any minions. Now, what if the shoe is on the other foot and the enemy is trying to find a crash into base because they have the freedom, because they have a successful window or whatever the case may be? Then we want to disrupt their crash into base. And so that's what's going to happen here. My ADC died, and so now they crashed the wave. I'm trying to disrupt the wave from crashing. That's why the enemy Jhin is walking forwards here, so to push me away, but I'm still kind of posturing, I'm pretending, or I'm threatening to maintain the free so that he keeps having to run forwards. So I'm wasting his time, which is very valuable. The wave eventually crashes, and now he hasn't found his crash into base timer because I disrupted it, so now he has to hang around in lane and try to shove another wave while my ADC is coming back to lane, full health, full mana, gold spent. So if you really want to snowball, after a successful window, crash into base. If you really want to prevent yourself from falling behind, prevent the enemy ADC from finding a crash into base. And so what results from this window is I just psychotically start running at him because I know that he's just low, he's out of position, the enemy support has already based, and then we get an enormous chunk here. Doesn't matter if we kill him or not, the damage has been done. So really engage in this crash into base minigame. I've talked a lot about being aggressive early on. Now, the later that we do get in the game, the more conservative you want to play. You want to make sure that you're safe. You have teammates in front of you. You're playing more of a front-to-back orientation of fights. And so that's what we're going to see here. You're still going to try and find Qs to keep your teammates healthy, but you're no longer running into people and trying to kill them. Especially in even number of fights, if you can't use your mobility advantage to find a number advantage fight. So while I'm not hanging back and doing nothing, I always have an exit strategy available. I'm never out of position. And that's just how you need to play as Soraka and basically any enchanter that you're team fighting on. As long as you're alive and you're getting to cast your spells frequently, then you're going to be providing a lot to a fight. So this is going to require quite a lot of awareness in skirmishes, which is much easier said than done. But try to provide to a fight while staying safe. As you can see here, we're really embracing the combat medic identity of Soraka. When fights get messier and numbers get smaller, then you're going to have a little bit more freedom to run around. But in those big, even number fights, be more conservative and disciplined. Another example of that coming up here, always have an exit strategy. So here, we're going to be fighting the Nunu. And notice how I'm not freaking out in this situation. I'm not like desperately running away from the enemy here, because then if I run here, then the enemies might be able to kill me over here. I'm trying to find a spot where I can stay safe and play on my cooldowns while still providing to the fight. And then once we have an advantage, then I have a lot more freedom to walk forwards and try to get more. But like I said, when it's those even number of fights, have an exit strategy. Another example of that here. So here we are, we're on Baron. And there's going to be a bit of a fight here. I'm going to be staying safe, preventing myself from getting jumped on while still finding Qs and still trying to keep my teammates alive. Last example of this coming up here. Cutting backwards, going to be more defensive, more reactive. And then once they have failed their engage, then I can get a little bit more confidence to start running forwards because we have the number advantage. This next concept is so important in general, but definitely on Soraka, and it helps her to be that combat medic that she needs to be. Pressure with your pressuring teammates. If your teammates are pressuring the map, then you are as well. You're not going to miss out on any fights because you're the support, you're not tied to minions or to camps. You really want to be there when action is going to be there. So in this example here, I start channeling my base. I have no wards, as we can see. I have some money to spend. I am very low on health, but it doesn't matter because my time is here right now. And I don't really need that much health to be effective in a skirmish anyway. If I can just heal someone, or if I can find a Q and then heal someone, or if I can find a crucial E, then that's going to make all the difference in some fights. And it's much better that you're here to be able to pressure with your teammates than if I base and go home right now and then something happens around here that I'm not there for. And then what's going to happen after that? Right, your teammates are just going to leave. They're going to go home themselves, or they're going to go and catch waves or clear camps. And so you really want to embrace these windows when your teammates are pressuring the map. So I cancel my base. Here we see the enemy Lulu, right? If I just immediately based, then we wouldn't have found this opportunity, right? Because now if Tam finds a Q and then finds a W and then I land my Q and I land my E on top of that, the Lulu's going to be dead or blowing her ult and her summoners. Unfortunately, Tam misses his Q and doesn't throw out a W, so that opportunity goes awry. But if you embrace this concept, you're going to find so many opportunities and you're going to really start to carry games. So now my base window has kind of gone, right? I hung around to try and find something with my time. Now look at the map. My teammates are starting to pressure, right? My Lucian's coming back on the map. My LeBlanc is here right now. So again, I'm not going to base. I'm going to pressure with my pressuring teammates. LeBlanc is pressuring. Let's get something done. And you can't predict what's going to happen, right? I don't know if that fight was going to fail or if my Q and my E are going to make all the difference in killing the Jinx or not. And this is just classic solo queue, right? There's going to be action, embrace it, be ready for it, anticipate it, seek it out. I'm sure you can appreciate that if I just immediately base when I was low there, then all of these 3 different opportunities, right? The Lulu over here, the Jinx over here, this team fight over here, I could have missed out on all of them. The next concept is that you can use your summoner spell, and especially your secondary summoner spell and heal, as a resource in ranged matchups because you don't need the heal to survive an all-in, right? Because there's no all-in threat. This can also be used if the enemy doesn't have threat or if you're just really confident. So here's going to be an example of using heal as a resource. I'm going to get value out of the heal, right? I'm going to heal here so that we both heal up, and I'm going to provide movement speed to my Jhin, who's going to get a big 4th shot on the enemy ADC here. And you can even consider this against higher threat matchups here like the Rel, because if we chunk out the ADC enough, then they're not going to have any more threat, right? If the Rel engages, we just kill her, or if the ADC tries to follow up, we just kill him. And so pressing that heal was really valuable. Let's just ignore what happens on the back end there. The final concept I want to talk about is mid first. So mid first means looking to shove mid and get a mid lane ward whenever nothing pressing is happening, so that you can force them to react to that wave, so that you can have first move to any part of the map. The middle of the map becomes so important the later that the game goes on. And remember that caveat that I said, if nothing pressing is happening. You're not going to be shoving mid when there's a fight nearby, right? You're going to be at that fight. But if nothing is happening, and this is a window where nothing is happening here, then let's encourage that mid first. So we shove mid wave. I'm going to get a ward in the mid lane, and then I can look to pressure somewhere else. So this fight's going to be slightly more favorable than it could have been if we didn't shove that wave initially, right? Because Jinx was reacting to that wave, and then she peeled up over here a little bit later. Again, nothing pressing is happening, so I'm going to be around mid. Force them to react to that wave, so now I have more freedom to walk forwards and find that ward, and then right back to mid first. So this is just a concept that you really want to embrace and play around with. Force them to react to those mid waves. And it's going to be a lot easier when you have the mid outer advantage for the towers. They react to mid wave again, I get to walk up and clear all of this vision out, and then another mid wave is going to enter the lane, and then I'm going to walk forwards. Value of the mid ward here, we see what they are planning to do around the middle of the map as well, and I can even walk forwards and cancel bases. Here, something pressing is happening. I notice a fight down here. And then once the fight is done, I'm going to move up and pressure around mid lane again. Of course, this is only going to be in the mid to late game. I don't want you to suddenly start laning mid pre 14 minutes in the laning phase. Another mid wave is entering. I'm going to be meeting up here, providing my teammates with confidence to shove this wave. They have to react to that wave. Once again, now we get to freely move in and control. And this is going to be very suffocating. There's not much they can do about this. We are going to have control of the river, and we can translate this to eventually getting Baron or finding picks or just stacking neutral objectives or being able to move towards fights first. Last example here. Get that mid shove, force them to react, and now I have a window to move off and control whatever I want. It's going to be hard for you to appreciate what you could lose from not doing mid first, because I'm shoving mid in all of these situations. But if we didn't shove that wave, then Jinx could be here and Jinx could help to get a kill before we force her to react to a wave. So it's basically just ensuring that you have a strategic advantage throughout the mid to late game. Thank you for watching. Please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting if you enjoyed the video. For world-class support, coaching, content, and community, go to wtl.lol/cupcake.